We are live at the Now What Show. I'm Miss Jen Alexander. I'm so excited you're here tonight. So, anxiety's on the rise. Now what? What do we do about it as educators? What do we do about it as family members? What do we do about it for ourselves? I'm so excited to have several guests with us in the studio today. And as we introduce one another, let's think about what comes to mind for you when you think about anxiety. What comes to mind for you when you think about anxiety? So Jessica Sinarski is with us. She is our expert guest tonight. She is also an author, a fellow speaker, and founder of BraveBrains. We're so glad you're here. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about you, Jessica, and tell us what comes to mind when you think of anxiety?
Sure. So I came to the world of education in a circuitous way from mental health. I was in private practice for years, but I really cut my teeth in foster care in the Bronx, and very quickly learned I didn't know what I needed to know to be helpful. And so I think I've had a journey similar to many in becoming more trauma informed, understanding how the nervous system plays into everything about why we behave the way we behave. And that has sort of set me on this path to share that with others in a really practical, tangible way. So that's what I spend my time doing now. And I will share, I know I'm supposed to share what comes to mind with the word anxiety, like so many things. One that immediately comes to mind is personal experience, both not as much for myself, but a lot of family members, including one of my kiddos who has some pretty significant anxiety, and just the way these things run in families, along with the increased information overload that is amping up this natural human emotion.
Makes so much sense. And you and I have some similar kind of paths that we've been on in terms of our work histories, but also personally, I think too, as mothers,
Yes.
even though our experiences are definitely different. But I too began part of my journey in learning about trauma and trauma-informed care in my relationship with the child welfare system as a foster and adoptive parent, but also as a professional school counselor and school-based play therapist too. So I think you and I have a lot in common in terms of how we look at the world, how important relationships are to us, and how we meet people where they are to help them feel, deal, and heal with all of the stressors that we're carrying. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah.
It means the world to me to have this conversation with you. And we also have Becky Lenz as well. So Becky, it's so great to have you. Becky and I go way back. We've been colleagues in a school district in the past. And Becky is also the current president of the Iowa School Counselor Association. Woo woo. We're so glad to have you in the studio. So Becky, what do you want to tell us about yourself, and how do you kind of think of anxiety, or what comes up for you when you think about it?
Yeah, so Becky Lenz, like Jen said, I am in my ending 19th year as a school counselor, which is kind of crazy to say, but I'm also a counselor educator for Upper Iowa, which was a great connection I had with Jen as well, but also the University of Northern Iowa. And so beyond being ISCA president this year, I've learned so much kind of in that leadership role. But yeah, I just really love the junior high kids, work with kids 7th through 9th grade. And so it's a very unique stage of not quite middle school, not quite high school. And so, yeah, I feel like I've been doing this a long time, where I feel like I've seen anxiety look like different things, and see it, from very generalized paths to, ones where obviously we are referring and consulting and get to work with so many different great people. And we have a great community to do that as well. So what I think about, or what comes up for me, obviously, working with kids, I feel like what comes up for me is the movie Inside Out. And maybe you guys can relate, but in working with kids and talking about anxiety, we talk about naming your anxiety. We talk about, what would you say to it? And so we're very much trying to personify it in a way that we can talk to it. And so I think of anxiety in the most recent one, Inside Out 2. And I just think about how we're teaching kids those skills, and that anxiety isn't all bad. And so I think it's that's kind of what comes up for me.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. This is going to be just a great conversation. And before we kind of move into kind of the depth of where we're going to go, I just also want to congratulate Becky on being a ramp school, not just once, but twice, right?
Yeah, twice. Yeah, this last year. So it's great. Yeah, we're so thankful for that designation and to get it again, and just super appreciative of our team. And shout out to my co-counselor, Megan Bowden, too.
Thanks for that. And just for our listeners who may not know what that is, RAMP is a designation that school counseling programs can work their way towards by having a model comprehensive program meeting the needs of all kids within what they're doing at school. So again, so glad you're here. And for those of you who are joining live or catching us on the replay, a couple of things that just to go over that are important to us as we do this work is that you're invited to show up safely and bravely with or without snacks, 100% who you are and how you are into this space together in our community. You're welcome to introduce yourself and engage in the chat as little or as much as you'd like to. Our goal is to nurture and challenge one another to grow. So we hope to challenge you to think about how you're understanding anxiousness, but also in growing in your skills in how you respond to it in meeting the needs of kids, but also ourselves. And I invite you to be relentless for school change together so that we are not only responding to stress, but doing everything we can to stop the harm that happens on campus and prevent it from happening again. With that, again, we have Jessica. We're going to talk a bit about your book. But before we go there, I want to share a bit about what comes to mind for me when I think of anxiety. And it's layers. Sometimes it's the feeling and the experience in my body, but it's also that sense of being on a hamster wheel, going. There's energy behind it and feeling like maybe I'm not getting anywhere. So that's kind of what comes to mind for me when I think of anxiety. So we're going to go deeper into that here in a little bit. But first, we're going to do our little segment called Hats Off to You Educators, because this work is for you. And most importantly, it is with you. We are in partnership with you. And as I thought about hats off to educators this week and today in particular, I was reminded of Superintendent Jennifer Gaffney, and also one of the principals that she works with, Jamie Cook. They've been in the news lately, Spectrum News 1, but then it's also been picked up by national news sources because in their school district, Sackett's Harbor Central School District in New York, they have had 3 students, children of theirs, and their mother who have been detained by ICE. And why I'm highlighting them is because these school leaders, in collaboration with their entire community, have been standing up, speaking out about the injustice of what has happened, the harm that is happening to these kids, and it's shining a light on harms that are happening across the country right now, and the important role that all of us as educators play in the classroom, but also within our communities as leaders for change. The president of the Coalition for New York's immigration system said that this family was correctly navigating the system, and yet they've been harmed and separated from their community. The superintendent said these kids are part of the fabric of our school community, and they insist that they must be reunited with their community back in New York. Hats off to you, educators, for the leadership role that you are embracing as you fight for the needs of all of our kids. So with that in mind, we'll do a little hats off to you. And we'll have a little music. So if you want to dance to the music, you can. So hats off to you, educators. Thank you for the important work that you do to make a difference. It matters. Big behaviors at school, everybody's got them. And while we're not focused per se on behavior in this episode, anxiety absolutely can affect behavior. And sometimes when I work with folks in schools, they'll say things about anxiety in terms of how students or children or teens may be anxious and then cling a bit, or not want to be as independent, or we see some regression in skills, that kind of sense of needing to get close. But anxiety doesn't always show up like that on the outside. And it definitely shows up in different ways on the inside of folks too. Sometimes anxiety is more of that I have this sense of energy in my body and it makes me want to feel more in control. And so I take control, or I try to be in charge, or I try to do everything myself so I don't have to depend on anyone else. So there's lots of different ways that anxiety can show up. And I thought we would start tonight by talking a bit about what are folks noticing in schools right now? I have some ideas based on my experience, but Becky and Jessica, I'd love to hear from you too. What are you hearing from other educators in regards to what is anxiety looking like right now in our schools? Becky, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I would say in education, we're really struggling with discomfort tolerance, with anxiety. So I would say avoidance is a big one. Recently with some of the work that our staff and district have done as far as learning about anxiety and getting some professional development, we are trying to kind of redesign how we're doing 504 accommodations if they are centered around anxiety, and being able to, those accommodations in the past that were once, take a break, or to things that essentially like took them out of what might have been perceived as a triggering event and not necessarily teaching a skill, like a lagging skill. And so I think we're trying to kind of circle back as we've seen this get worse over the last handful of years, and to be able to teach kids.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. Jessica, how about you?
Yeah, I love hearing. I think the that discomfort tolerance, frustration tolerance, that is such an important piece of managing all emotions, including anxiety. So I think of like anxiety is a very uncomfortable emotion for most of us. At the same time, once you're used to it, it can be uncomfortable to not feel it, right? Like anxiety, you brought up Inside Out. Anxiety is trying to do a job. And so when we try to shut it down, or like not feel it, or avoid every situation that triggers it, we aren't building those foundational skills that let us tolerate it. And I think of how all of these things interact with each other from a developmental perspective. Like kids spend less time being bored. Kids spend less time sort of having to navigate a variety of uncomfortable emotions in the modern world. Adults too, to some extent, And so I think it's always a challenge, because we can see these pendulum swings where it's like, okay, well, now every kid who has anxiety as part of the picture of what's going on with them, well, we can't accommodate them in such and such ways. Like that's not what they need. They need to face that, and they need to, whatever. There are some kids who have a variety of compounding things that are going to make that challenging. I think especially of our kids with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or other brain-based challenges where anxiety might be a component of it, but there's other executive functioning and behavioral challenges that go with it. I think one of the things that I'm seeing in schools is the sort of across the board is, because we are used to the information age, because everything is present all the time, because kids now are like, it's sort of the norm to be on social media early, that there's the FOMO, the fear of missing out, is at an 11 at all times. And so even just the normal everyday interactions where we build some of that, like, oh, she looked at me funny, or, oh, that interaction didn't go great. A lot of those are not happening in the way that are probably best for human development. And so if you compound that with COVID, and you compound that with screens being in kids' faces all the time, then we're missing all of these little opportunities to build the skills to navigate human relationships that can be really life-giving, but are also really scary. humans are both the best thing for other humans and the absolute most terrifying things for other humans. And so I think, as with most human emotion, it comes back to this, like, how can we be in relationship with ourselves and how can we be in connection with each other? And those are both kind of hard right now.
I like how you're explaining that, Jessica, because when I talk to folks, it's often thinking of it kind of in these different ranges of things, and I think that's what you're alluding to too. That there's not all stress and anxiety is bad, right? It can propel us to solve problems, to even be creative, to think outside the box, to approach things in a different way. It alerts us to the need that may be there and gives us an opportunity to meet that need, whether that's ourselves as individuals or in connection with others, which is how we need to solve a lot of problems. We can't solve it on our own, and we're not meant to. We're not wired to deal with the world in isolation. We're meant to be connected, and yet it's so scary. And so to think about what kinds of feelings in the body go with pushing ourselves into our growth zone, to meeting a challenge and working through it, to regulate through that so we get to the other side, which then completes that stress cycle, right? Versus what takes us to a place of overwhelming stress, whether that's trauma related or other neurodivergent kinds of issues that people are dealing with that make their sensitivities different in terms of that window of tolerance. But also then, how do we support one another through that without taking them out of all stress, which prevents them then from growing? So how do we help each person find that growth zone, and how do we support knowing those needs are going to ebb and flow? And so what somebody's ready for in one moment to work through, the next moment they actually might need a pause from, because it's just too much right now. So no wonder it's messy, because it's changing and it's not something that's always easy to discern.
Yeah, I think that's spot on.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's kind of move into another question. I'm really curious about, as we think about how to help folks, let's think about children in particular, youth and teens, children and teens. What do we think tends to make anxiety worse? So there's things that educators may do. There's things that family members may do. There's things that we may do ourselves when we're experiencing anxiety. But if we think in terms of children and teens, Jessica, why don't you answer this one? What do you think are some things that adults sometimes do that can actually make anxiety worse?
So let's see, I would say this could go a variety of directions. I don't want anyone to walk away from this being like, oh, shoot, I do that. I think one of the things we've sort of hit on already, and that's the over-accommodation. Don't feel stressed. Don't be uncomfortable. Like, no, we got to be uncomfortable. And like, yes, this is really hard and we can do hard things. Like having not belittling the emotion and not like, don't minimize it, because for some kids, getting their math book out is insanely hard. Like it's just so overwhelmingly hard to, get in line with their class, or to, start that test or whatever it is. Like some of these things are harder for some of our kids than we can imagine. So I'm not saying belittle it or like, yeah, everybody does it, or, don't feel it. No, acknowledge the feeling, but don't remove all stress. I think another thing that's important for us to pull back from is, as much as we can get screens and especially social media out of the hands of children and tweens and even young teens, the better. Like the stats are just glaring. And so I think as much as it can feel like, well, everybody's doing it, hold strong. Those of you who are parenting kiddos at whatever age, have the conversations too, where it's not like, well, this is just what we do in our house and too bad for you. But, oh man, I get how you want to be on Instagram. Yep. And your friends are on there, and wow, that must be so hard. And you can feel left out. So what I'm wrestling with, sweetheart, is that I know what this does to brains. And I've seen the studies about how it lifts, like it increases depression, and it increases anxiety, and it increases conflict. And so can we think together about like, what are other ways that you guys can be connected? I'm parenting boys. I'm not parenting girls. So my experience has been a little bit different with it, but it's still a lot of those same conversations of, it's you and me against screen addiction. It's not me against you and your screen, right? So that I think is a really powerful way that we can, it's a big small step that we can make to not make anxiety worse. Delay is the way, as Protect Young Eyes says. There are lots more, but those are some of the things that come to mind immediately.
And what you said about making it, us against the addiction reminds me of what Becky was saying about kind of personifying anxiety almost, kind of bringing it outside of yourself and saying, let's tackle this together. I'm on your side. We're in this together against that, or at least in relation to that, even if we're not fully against it, because not all anxiety is bad again.
Right.
But how are we going to tackle it together in that sense of joint problem solving, but also just empathy is what you're talking about. Having empathy for the emotion that's there, acknowledging it without worshiping it in a way. I think
yes,
we can acknowledge that anxiety is there. It can even be a teacher for us, but it doesn't always have to be in charge. It doesn't have to be the boss all of the time. And how can we take some of our control back together?
And it doesn't have to be our identity. I think that's the other thing that there's kind of this trend with that, well, I'm depressed, so that's what I do. I'm ADHD, so that's what I do. I think acceptance of how our brains are wired is really important, and there has been a lack of that. And so, as often happens, we see this pendulum swing. But then, I'm hearing kids and teens and adults talking about, well, I'm just anxious, so that's how that's going to be. Oh, that breaks my heart. Like, that's not all of you. You are amazing and dynamic. And yes, your brain is wired toward anxiety. So let's say hello to it, see what it needs from us, and also embrace the whole of who you are, not just this one piece of who you are.
Yes. Good stuff. Go ahead, Becky.
Yeah, I just think that's so helpful when you say, like, acknowledge that it's there, part of that, like, personifying it, like, hello, of course you showed up today. Of course I'm feeling nervous before I, go do this brave thing. So acknowledging that it's there and it's okay to still carry it. But that, kind of like you were saying, Jen, it doesn't have to take the driver's seat in that too, that, like, you still have that emotional management, you still have that control. And again, that just, it's not something we're probably just innately born and wired to do. So, like, learning that skill, having that role modeled. Yeah.
Hard work. It's hard work.
It is hard work.
Everything else we teach, right? We have to embody it and live it, and we're going to make mistakes, and sometimes we're going to be ready for a little more than another time, and that to know that we're not alone is such a huge piece of it, because we all feel better when we're not alone in something. That's going to decrease anxiety in and of itself. I want to ask, let's kind of switch, not switch necessarily, but keep going with this this kind of what can we do about it piece. So if we had to kind of think about some advice for folks, whether they are classroom educators, leaders in schools in another role, parents and other primary caregivers, or even for people thinking about how they're carrying their own anxiety, what pieces of advice would you have for folks? And I have a few to jump in with too, but I would love to hear from you, Jessica, what you would suggest to people.
I think the 24-hour news cycle is no friend of the amygdala. Social media is not great for adult brains either. And so as much as we're having this conversation on, various platforms right now, so it's not that it's entirely terrible, all the time, but set limits for yourself. I feel like a person with pretty solid I feel like I used to be a person with pretty solid self-control. I'm not sure that I am as much as I used to be. And I have had to put limits on my phone for how much time I spend on social media, even just for work. I'm not even on it personally that much, but just these things are built to be addictive. These things are built to make your brain want to check and want to do to be compulsive in a way. And so I think modeling that, did I lose connection?
No, you're still here.
Oh, good. Okay. My screen froze. I think modeling that for practicing that ourselves, being a good boss to ourselves and being like, okay, little brain, like this is not actually helpful for you. You are just going down the rabbit trail. That doesn't mean tune out, don't care about other people. Like that's not what I'm saying. But yeah, the 24-hour news cycle is no friend of the amygdala. So I think that can be a helpful little shift we can make for ourselves. Yeah, I'll turn it over. Becky, what else comes to mind?
Yeah, I feel like it kind of reminds me what you said, that is like kids haven't, and even adults too, are struggling to know what's an emergency and what's not, right? Like with that amygdala, it's, kind of like, it's so great that we have that for survival. But sometimes when it like fires off, like fight, flight, or freeze, and it's not an emergency, being able to, stay regulated, like that's why I love so much about helping and kind of empowering kids to be able to know about their brain and what it's doing, so we talk about the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain, and when we kind of go into that survival mode with the amygdala, it kind of shuts off that logical thinking of this is not an emergency. And so being able to learn kind of what's an emergency, even though your body is telling you that, being able to be self-aware that's my body is telling me that this is an emergency. And, but obviously that's not always tied to how we're feeling or how we see a situation. And so, when you're kind of talking about that, it just reminded me of being able to know what's a real threat and what is not.
Yeah. I think what you're both talking about reminds me of this sense of how our bodies seek a quick fix sometimes when we feel these sensations. And I talk a lot in the language of sensations, and I know, Jessica, you do too, because our nervous system doesn't say, oh, I'm anxious, or oh, I'm scared, or oh, I'm worried or afraid or mad or whatever it is. It's sensations that come up, and then we link meaning to what those sensations are. So to ask ourselves, am I seeking a quick fix right now, as we often do as humans, and what kind of things does the world kind of sending my way, like technology, that gives me that dopamine hit, that gives me that sense of quick fix and how I want more and more and more? Can this be an opportunity where I take a pause?
Yeah.
And I tend to my body first in whatever way that works for you and the people you're with, and then be able to access that upstairs brain to then come up with an idea of how you're going to move forward, whether that's you yourself or in connection with somebody. And that's where I think educators come in, and family caregivers too, and even friends, how we come into these relationships together, even to say to someone else, hey, I can tell you're really worked up about this. I wonder if it would help if let's just take a moment together and do something that we know helps you to feel better. And then we can circle back and talk about this. We're going to come back to it. It matters to me that you feel this way. But I think if we tend to kind of what's stirred up first, we'll be better able to solve this together, or at least get closer to solving it together.
I think that's so important. And I'm glad you're bringing the body piece into it, Jen, because so often we jump to those cognitive strategies, especially when it comes to anxiety and depression. And as we know all too well, there is a lot that upstairs brain is offline for a lot of our kids who are experiencing anxiety. And then if we have trauma in the mix or other brain-based differences, then that might make it even harder to access our thinking brain, our language, to be able to put words to emotions. And that's part of what led me down the path of putting like animal protection modes to some of the downstairs brain behavior that we see, because I've worked with so many kids who can't say I was mad or I was scared, but they can say like, I'm in turtle, or, I was having a tiger moment. Yep. It was my tiger brain. Okay. Well, let's talk through what was going on that activated that tiger brain. And so as far as prevention goes, I think one of the best things we can do is get kids moving. So it's so simple and so powerful. If you haven't looked it up, check out, I think it's called The Daily Mile. If you Google The Daily Mile, it is a free program available to any school anywhere. and it has loads of resources to help you get kids moving. And we know that we have to move our bodies to fuel our brains, especially to fuel our upstairs brains. And so I think we can dial down so much of the misbehavior that we see, especially in the elementary years, but even in middle and high school, if we give our kids more opportunities for movement, and especially more opportunities for big muscle, proprioceptive rich activities. So I think that's another like prevention and treatment strategy. Like one of my son who gets very stuck, sometimes the only thing we can do is actually like just move, like leave the house, like move to a different room, something where we're just moving our body, because otherwise we're stuck in a porcupine turtle combo that is miserable for everyone involved. So that would be another maybe thing to throw in the mix. And I always feel nervous with these kinds of things because I'm thinking of the like completely exhausted, preschool teacher or fourth grade teacher who is on here right now or listening later. And like, I'm sorry, lady, you want me to do what? You want me to fit one more thing into our day? So I'll leave the link later, but there's lots of ways to do this in a no prep, low prep, fits with what you're already trying to do with your kids and just makes it more successful kind of way. So I have this empathy for like, I don't want to add one more thing to your plate. My hope is that if we can just tweak a little bit of how we do things, it actually removes a lot of the frustration and stress from your whole classroom community.
Absolutely, because when we build that into the rhythm of the day, and you don't have to think of it as each individual student does this and somebody else does this and that, but I mean there needs to be that too, but how can we think of the whole group benefiting from this? So can we do a brain break and be a little more conscious instead of random about the brain break that we're doing to bring that movement in, and even to think about when we're doing it. So instead of thinking about, I'm noticing that there's dysregulation right now, let's do a brain break, thinking about it in terms of patterns. Well, when do I start to see patterns of dysregulation in my classroom? How can I plan a brain break before we get to that point to help prevent it? Because it's so much easier to help folks when they're a little bit dysregulated rather than a lot dysregulated. And then sometimes we can even prevent that dysregulation altogether, which is just good teaching for all of us. And it'll help educators too when we participate with our kids in those things. That's self-care.
Yeah. And making it playful. Like I'm thinking about our middle and high schoolers, like look up brain gym activities, like find little things where you get cross body motion and good, strong, focused attention practices that are also relational. So rather than giving kids 5 minutes on their phones at the end of class, if they get X, Y, and Z done, why don't we build 5 minutes of this in, and then you might have a better time doing what you're trying to do and still end a little bit early. Like, I think, I know it's easier said than done. And so I don't ever want to belittle that the process of change and how many decisions educators have to make. But I love that reminder to get out ahead of it. There was a pre-K group I worked with that started getting big muscle movement involved in how they took attendance. So they would count off, and then they do, okay, there's 7 of us here, so we're going to do 7 jumping jacks, or we're going to do 7, cross body. And behavior incidents in the morning went down, attention went up, counting was improving, counting was not going well for this group. And so like their academic skills are improving, their behavior is improving, and everybody's feeling a little less stressed.
Win, win, win.
Yes. I think that's so important too, like doing all of those things preventatively. But it has like the kind of some of that instant gratification too, like we were talking about motion with the happy hormones. Like, I think it's being able to teach them these things so that when there is dysregulation, right? Like maybe they, kind of go back to maybe something that is muscle memory. But I feel like, at the junior high, sometimes there's, we're able to have a little bit more abstract conversations with kids, but I think with our teachers, just role modeling through language, through examples, like flexibility, being able to be adaptable, so like something we've tried to do like around our table at dinner, like instead of like, what was one great thing from your day? Like, which is still a good thing to ask, but like, what's something that happened that was unexpected? Like, so being able to normalize things changing and going different
Yeah.
than you think and how you adapt to that. And I heard someone called it like be cooked spaghetti, so that you can be like malleable, like, don't be uncooked spaghetti where you're like rigid. We need to be flexible. And so, I see those visuals, but just those ways of being able to, you're almost teaching a mindset so that they can use it as a response to when things don't go their way or when they don't have the reassurance or certainty that anxiety wants.
Yeah, and we're creating a rhythm around it because our nervous systems are prediction machines. And so we're the more we practice these things, then our nervous system even anticipates them and engages in that rhythm. And so I love it that you're incorporating that around a conversation at the table. It's something doing not necessarily every single time you sit down, but often enough. And it's part of the rhythm. And then that becomes part of what each of you can do when you face those experiences of change, whether you're conscious of it or not. It becomes part of the pattern of how you relate with the world. And that reminds me too of some work that Brene Brown has done and has shared in her writing around how anxiety and excitement in the body actually feel very similar. So one of the things that I think is powerful with kids of all ages, but especially adolescents, is to even check in with them and say, what are you noticing in your body that's telling you it's anxiety right now? And is it possible you're excited and that you could actually see this as a good thing instead of a bad thing? How are you making meaning of those sensations that you're experiencing? And that is a powerful thing that any of us can do with one another or with ourselves too.
Jen, I love that reminder, especially for our kids with trauma histories or for those of us with trauma histories, because our brains are very good at making scary stories out of what is happening in life. And so I have seen so many kids who are uncomfortable feeling happy. Like that is a dangerous emotion if you're not sure when the next shoe is going to drop. And so I think in the in the relationships where you have that kind of an opportunity, we have to be careful with this kind of thing. But in those relationships, it is really helpful to bring up, that heat up the back of your neck can mean a lot of different things, right? That little bit of in your stomach can mean a lot of different things. And so what is the whole story? If I can pull, if I can get my upstairs brain back involved in what's happening right now, is there a little excitement and maybe a little nervousness and maybe a little confusion, with our kids who have that verbal capacity, can we and that like sensory capacity, I guess, to body awareness, to be able to start having those conversations.
Yes. Good stuff. Such good stuff. We need to kind of start wrapping up. I don't want to because it's so fun to talk to the both of you. I want to kind of get to questions that Becky, you might have that you think other school counselors or other educators might have. And then there's a couple other things I want us to do before we end today too. So Becky, anything that you're wondering or you think other educators might be wondering, or even parents and other caregivers that we haven't covered yet?
I kind of think sometimes it's having that common language, but we have, teachers that come to us as resources, but sometimes there is a level of anxiety that is above our scope, right? And so I think being able to provide our teachers the tools to be able to, they're kind of with kids in the classroom being the ones that are role modeling some of that language or that adaptability, but being able to provide our teachers more tools when they notice anxiety take over for a student in their class. And so I think that's something, just some of those immediate things that could, nothing's an immediate quick fix, but any tools to add to the toolbox, I would say. And that could even be for parents at home too, because sometimes we don't know when that anxiety is going to get to the level it does. And a lot of times it's not for a specific reason. Maybe our body knows, but we can't express it. But even, family members at those moments with kids being able to co-regulate, but then what else?
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a great question. And one of the things that comes to mind, I think we've been talking kind of around it and it's been in the conversation, but maybe it's time to just name it, is that being aware too that these nervous system states are contagious. And so I'm sure we've all can think of a time, even a time as a counselor, when I've been around someone who had a high level of anxiety and how I started to feel it then too. And so even just to acknowledge that happens and try to be aware of it so that we're not kind of being carried away in that flood of whatever that anxiety is feeling like in that moment. So to be able to take that pause, to be able to name it and just say, hey, I wonder if you're feeling kind of stirred up inside, what words would you put to it, so that we slow things down a bit and we're aware of the fact that we want to do what we can not to be carried away in that dysregulation along with the student can make a huge difference. And along with that, to understand that even if as an educator, you're not aware yet of some of your own sensations and what that's like, one thing that I encourage educators to watch for are those times when you start wanting to take control, like more control.
Yeah.
The leader, because you need to be the leader, the stronger, wiser, nurturing, protective leader in your classroom. That is an absolute must. And there's times where we can probably all think of where we have leaned into, I'm going to take control and they're not going to get away with this and I'm going to handle this and it's going to be my way. I've been there. I'm sure we all can think of those times. And often anxiety drives that, because anxiety can feel out of control. So even to notice, okay, that's a signal that I'm there with kids, or I'm there by myself. Let's slow that down. Let's notice what's happening in my body. Let's think about what might help me feel better before we address whatever might be driving it. I don't know, Jessica, what would you add to that?
So I think, again, there's some of those in the moment things that we've been talking about already. So, move your body, like acknowledge the feeling and encourage the next step, right? Like those are some of those in the moment things. I also think it's worth talking about the out of the moment conversations that can help you have more productive in the moment tools. So part of why I create big, bright visual picture books and resources is I want people to feel comfortable and drawn to these, to books and visuals and things, so that we can have conversations about really maybe embarrassing or vulnerable emotions in safe ways. I am never a proponent of like, well, in our class, we're just going to talk about our trauma. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I've heard people give that advice and I'm like, what? Stop. No, stop. No. So that's not what I'm talking about. But I do think we can have a class conversation about, okay, we all have, turtle brain that can kind of take over. And so what does it feel like? Well, this is what it feels like to me. This is what it feels like to me. Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So what do you need, like, either to help stay out of turtle brain, or like when you're in your turtle brain, like what helps you? And the thing that's so beautiful about that, like, I love staff having those conversations as well as staff with students, because the answers, there's often some overlap and there are often big differences. And so sometimes a teacher thinks they're helping because they're doing what helps their turtle brain, when this student is like, that's the worst thing that someone can do. And so having these conversations in 5 minutes in morning meeting after reading a story together, like that can be such a huge piece of both prevention as well as giving you in the moment tools to use, so that are going to be much more effective than whatever, photocopied coping skill sheet that we use because that's what we have available, but it's overwhelming to the downstairs brain. And so I think those proactive conversations, especially with accessible, approachable language and visuals, can be just so powerful.
I love how you brought it back to feelings and needs. My two favorite phrases in the whole world when working with folks and with adolescents, just inviting them to pick out a picture, like cut it out, bring it, just bring a picture that goes with anxiety. And what cool, you can have small group discussions, you can pair up. People don't have to share it all. They can. But then a question that I would encourage folks to pair with that discussion, especially with teens, is, and what makes it worse for you? It's so much easier to talk about what makes it worse than than to focus on what makes it better, because you might not know what makes it better, or you might not necessarily want to say it in front of everybody. But it's pretty easy to talk about what makes it worse, and how powerful that is to know in your classroom community, to know what makes things worse for each other. That is powerful in terms of how we show up for each other too.
Oh, I love that. I just love that. The idea of like how as kids we teach them to show up for each other, right? I mean, that's like what we're wired for. And just teaching that in a classroom environment and just what that does for culture, that's so great.
And they do it. Like, what's beautiful is they will step up for each other. Not everyone all the time, just like adults can't do it all the time, but it is really beautiful when we assume the best of people instead of trying, especially like tweens and teens, instead of trying like getting in like manage behavior, control behavior. Like, let's have good boundaries, be a good boss, right? And empower them, because they're going to have to be their own boss real soon, like real soon.
And to show your humanity alongside them, when you can say to a group of kids at any age, I feel that way sometimes too. I even feel that way at school. Sometimes it's hard for me to get up and come to school in the morning because I'm worried about something that's going to happen, that we're just human with each other. We can be real without losing our authority in that leadership role. In fact, it's more powerful when we are real and genuine, because kids see through everything else.
They do. And doesn't it make sense that like, we don't get to do these awesome, like amazing, meaningful things in life without having to deal with, like, part of the contract with life is the stress and the discomfort and the frustration. And that's part of the human experience, right? But it's, I just think it helps shift that mindset a little bit to look at it differently. I love it.
Becky, that reminds me of something for maybe for parents who are listening. And I'm sure this fits in classroom culture as well. But one of the things we intentionally did when our boys were younger is like when we were getting ready for a trip or like, going to visit family or something like that, to whatever extent possible, we would get the boys involved in the packing and the whatever. And we would also talk about, hey, I'm going to be off work, so I have to work late tonight to get prepped, because that's part of being able to go on this fun vacation. And just helping them, like, instead of them going and playing while we're unpacking the car, like, they're part of bringing that in. They're part of the stress of travel in a healthy way, while and then that reward of the vacation or the whatever is sweeter, because they've been part of both sides of that.
Yeah. And when we can understand that and embrace that in learning, that's what we're here for at school. Right? It's like, we want kids to have the skills to be able to be in that growth zone, to feel the feels that come up from it and with it, and to regulate through it and land on the other side. Because not only does it feel good, but that's where the power of learning is at, right?
And that's adulting, right?
Yes.
That's every success you're going to have in life involves some stress and anxiety.
Well, and I love that too, because while you kind of coach and support, support them in a sense, you're providing the opportunity, you're kind of coaching them through that. Like, they're dealing with a healthy amount of stress for a situation that is a part of life that they'll be doing. When successful at it, down the road, it's inevitable that they're going to come across a situation that's stressful again. And it's like remembering back to the times I was successful with this stress or with this experience, because they need those success stories too, in the times where they need to draw upon some courage that I can do this again. Even if my anxiety is telling me I'm nervous, I can't just thanks for showing up, anxiety. I knew you'd be here, but I have done this in the past, even if it looked different. And so I'm not interested in your feedback today, anxiety.
Drive
the bus today.
Becky, that's actually another great, like, in the moment strategy when you've had these sort of classroom conversations that then it becomes something that you can say, like, hey, is anxiety telling you a scary story right now? It sounds like it's saying you're going to do terrible at this test. Even though you're prepared, you're going to do awful, right? Like, that's kind of the message it's giving you, right? Yes. Okay. let's see if we can get that upstairs brain back online, everybody, and see if we can show up. Like, let's tuck our upstairs brains in and see if we can show up for this test. And then the other like fun thing for maybe your upper elementary and middle and high is start some sort of grit jar or like perseverance, sticky note board or something like that, where the things that you've done, like there's a big assignment coming. And one of the things that you can do preemptively is be like, you know what, I'm imagining all the sticky notes that are going to be on that board 1 month from now when you guys have gotten through this. Right now, it feels like it could never happen. But I have seen this happen before where I have had 25 essays in my hand and it got done. And so I am excited to see you build that muscle this month. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. But man, you got this, right? Mm-hmm. That's it. It flips it from, let's dial down anxiety to, let's empower, let's build skills. We got this.
Yeah.
And we can even tie that in a concrete way with photographs, like taking photographs of the messy middle with your kids, like showing them not necessarily their faces in frustration, but like the middle of the project and putting that up. And then when you get to the other side, say, what would you say to the person who's here again? Like, how would you encourage them?
I love that.
Encourage yourself? So what does that sound like? What does that look like in our community? Because it makes it very concrete in terms of we're going to be there again and we're going to get through it together. And with that, we have got to give some space here to talk about your book, Jessica, because it's so good. It's called Hello Anxiety by the one and only Jessica Sinarski. So what do you want to tell us about it and about this fun giveaway that you have coming up?
So one thing that I feel like we haven't talked about much today that was really important to me to include in the book is there's a little section. It's the story of Destiny Davis and the dreaded book report. And her dad is the main one who's giving her some tools and skills from his own experience carrying around that heavy book of anxiety. And there's a flashback scene where we see that how anxiety showed up for him was stomping and fussing when it was time to put away the laundry because he was just sure it was going to take forever. And his mom would say, sweetie, I think anxiety's telling you a scary story. Laundry forever sounds terrible. Laundry for 5 minutes, like it might just take 5 minutes. I think anxiety can often show up as defiance and disrespect. And some of those behaviors that are very triggering for adults. And so I just wanted to give a little nod to that. My publisher even was like, wait, are we sure we want to include something about laundry? Like, is that relatable? And all of the moms that pre-read the book were like, oh my gosh, this is exactly how it happens for my kid with anxiety. Mm-hmm. So there it's chock full of tools. It's a very warm and sweet story between within the family. It's super relatable to all different kinds of kids, where we're not we're not saying, hello anxiety, you're the best, but it's that middle ground of like, we actually don't get to say goodbye anxiety forever. Like that's not a thing. It wouldn't be good for us. Mm-hmm. And so as with all the books in this series and in the Riley the Brave series, we're going to really honor what those emotions are trying to do for us and use our whole wise brain, build that strong staircase of the brain and, in a really connected way. And so that's sort of what's embedded in this book.
It's amazing. I've read it. It's wonderful. Of course, it's rooted in sound neuroscience and in kid-friendly language. You can hear Jessica's wisdom just shining through in the pages. Do you want to tell us about your giveaway?
Yeah, so I am fairly new to LinkedIn, and I would love to connect with anyone here who might be on the platform. If you just send the word anxiety to me in a message, let's connect, and then I will draw a winner. I have on the slide there April 9th. I think we probably need to push that back a bit. So maybe we'll draw the winner next Tuesday, April 15th. So we will draw a winner Tuesday, April 15th. I'll send out a free copy of the book. If you work with littles, I would definitely recommend checking out the Riley the Brave series as well, where we're going to honor big feelings and find our way through, like the both and.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Check out Jessica's page on LinkedIn. Send her that message of anxiety so you can be entered to win the giveaway on April 15th. And while you're on LinkedIn, connect with me too, because I'm there as well as the other social media pages. And I want to highlight a couple of other resources that I love to use with kids around anxiety, in addition to Jessica's new book. So one of my favorites for littles is Ruby Finds a Worry. And the illustrations are great. One of the things I love about this book is that Ruby connects with a friend. And that connection is one of the things that helps Ruby with those big feelings and realizing she is not alone, which is good for all of us. I also love You've Got Dragons. I don't have that one with me. I went to find it and I couldn't find it. Somebody must have borrowed it and I don't have it in my hands at the moment. But I love this book because it doesn't talk about anxiety per se. That word is never used throughout the whole book, but it talks about this character who has a dragon. And basically that dragon can be whatever is kind of haunting the person in the moment. But for a lot of children and older kids that I've worked with, it is anxiety, and you can talk about it without talking about it in that great book. I also love Tough as Lace by Lexi Bruce. This is a neat read for adolescents, and Lexi is looks like she has it all together out in the world, and nobody thinks that she has any problems, and that's how she kind of wants it to stay. But yet she's carrying a lot of anxiety inside, and she learns that keeping that hidden isn't the best way to go. And it's not one of those books that has horrible things happen or some tragedy. It's just kind of a run-of-the-mill kind of a situation, and is in a series of steps that happen in her life that help her to learn those lessons, that she doesn't have to hide it, which is really important. I also just read Simon Says by Erin Bow. And it didn't even make the slide because I read it after I made the slides. This has become and will become one of my favorite books to suggest. 3rd grade through 7th grade chapter book here. Simon experienced trauma, but it happened before the book starts. So it's not all about the trauma. And he's in a new community trying to make friends and dealing with some real panic related to his PTSD that he has. So those symptoms that he's carrying are real and very difficult. And it's hilarious. Great humor throughout. And he builds these relationships with friends that are very healing for him. And those relationships are even healing for his entire family. So just a powerful, good read. Simon Sort of Says by Erin. I believe I'm saying that right, Bow. So check those out. There's more resources out in the world. Please feel free to drop comments in the chat, in the comments about tools that you use, resources that you like as well. I also want to alert everybody to what is going up new on the blog today. Right after we finish this live, I have a new post that will be landing, and it includes my new free guide specifically written for non-certified educators to help you put relationships first all over school campuses. So if you're in transportation, or you do recess supervision, or you are a special education paraeducator or paraprofessional, there are tips in here for you. And so you can access that on this new blog. Plus, I have a Get Grounded activity that you can use with your whole class. So we talked about how important it is to know what to do in the moment when big feelings are stirred up or anxiety is present. This is my own adaptation on the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding technique that is a powerful one to use, but this is one you can use with your whole class. So maybe you're noticing tensions are higher, where folks have been working on a project and they're starting to get frustrated. You can pause and do some movement. Would be a good thing to do first. Then you can also say, all right, before we kind of circle back to our next step, why don't you look around the room if you can find 3 things that you can see and point to them. 3, 2, 1. Then do 2 things that make a sound. 2 and 1. And then can you point to 1 thing that somebody could taste or smell if they were going to try that? And that will help ground everybody, get you kind of refocused again, and you could talk about what's the next step, or even give some encouragement for that next step. So that's all explained in the new blog post as well. There's a download for free. Grab it, use it as a reminder, put it up on your whiteboard to help you put that into gear in your own practice. Other things you can do, try that grounding technique, read that blog post, share this live. And like Jessica said, connect with her on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. We want to keep the conversations going and know that we are here to support you. We both work with groups all around the nation and even internationally too. And so if this is something that we can help bring information to your teams about how to help folks with anxiety or other symptoms that they might be experiencing related to big stress, that is what we do in both a responsive and a preventive way. Anything else you want to say about that, Jessica?
No, that's spot on. I like the simplification of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think in a pinch, it's hard sometimes to remember which order they go in and all of that. So I love that. I can't seem to post it in the comments on the live, but I have put in the private chat the link to the blog post that has the lots of ideas for easy ways to incorporate movement into your work.
Awesome. Thank you for doing that very, very much. We all have a lot coming up on our plates as we move through April into May. I'll be facilitating a webinar for credit with CEU Creations on April 11th. I'm really excited about that. It's for mental health professionals related to trauma-informed counseling interventions. I'll be writing a guest blog for the Institute of Child Psychology and engaging in lots and lots of continued planning for back to school PD, some summer trainings, and beyond. So that's what's coming up on my plate. Thank you so much for being here. Jessica, you have been incredible as always. It's just delightful to have conversation with you, to learn with you and from you. And Becky, wonderful to reconnect, and so glad you were here adding to the conversation with the real life observations that you have about what's happening in schools, your school, but also with other school counselors, and also how you are taking this trauma-sensitive approach to your learners and to your community. It's inspiring and so, so important. If I think of one word that goes with our work together today, it's hope, and how hope is never silent. Jessica, Becky, would you like to share a word that you're kind of thinking of in relation to our conversation today as we wrap up?
I think resilient. Like it's such a, you think about like grit and kind of what we talked about with being able to be flexible and lean into the hard and do the hard. Like kids are so resilient, and I just have so much value in the power of overcoming and doing the hard and being brave. So I just, that's what I would say is resilience.
Thank you.
Can I cheat and say kindred spirit?
Of
I feel
course.
like there's like a connection. Connected doesn't feel like it sums it up enough, but there's like the kindred spirit, the connection across miles. That's what I'm feeling.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Thank you both so much for being here. For our viewers and listeners, please check out Jessica's blog. Check her out on LinkedIn. I'm going to post all that information on my blog later, right after we conclude here today. I'm on all the social medias. Connect with us there. If you're not connected with the Iowa School Counselor Association, they put out amazing resources too. And Becky, again, is the president. So connect with us. We're here for you and with you too. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Please take good care.